Daniel Grant had never liked the back fence of his property. It was old, crooked, and half-rotten, but it marked the boundary between his yard and the thick woods beyond. At night, those woods turned into a wall of darkness, a place where the wind howled strangely, and shapes shifted if you stared too long. One autumn night, Daniel sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, trying to unwind after work. The crickets sang, the air was cool, and the moonlight spilled across the yard. He almost felt relaxed, until his eyes drifted toward the fence. Someone was standing there, tall, thin, motionless, just beyond the fence line. Daniel squinted, his heart leaping. The figure didn't move. It didn't step forward. It just stood there, as if watching. He blinked hard, and it was gone. Daniel told himself it was a trick of the light. Shadows and tired eyes. He went inside, locked up, and tried to sleep. But around 2 a.m., a sound jolted him awake. Creak. It was the unmistakable groan of his old back gate. Daniel sat up in bed, his chest tight. He forced himself to listen. Silence stretched for a long moment. Then, another creak. Someone was opening his gate. He grabbed the baseball bat by his nightstand and crept to the window. He pulled the curtain aside just a fraction. The yard looked empty. The fence stood silent. The gate was shut. Still, Daniel didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next evening, Daniel sat inside with every light on. He kept the blinds closed, the doors locked, the bat nearby. Around midnight, his phone buzzed. It was a motion alert from the old security camera he had mounted on the back fence. His stomach sank as he opened the app. The grainy footage showed the backyard, lit faintly by the moon. At first, nothing. Then movement. A tall man, long-limbed, thin as a skeleton, stepped slowly into view. His head tilted at an unnatural angle, as though his neck couldn't hold the weight. The figure leaned against the fence, and then, without a sound, reached long fingers through the gaps in the rotting wood. Daniel shut off the feed, his skin crawling. He didn't want to see more. The following night, Daniel tried to stay awake. He sat on the couch, bat across his lap, TV playing quietly just to break the silence. But as the clock neared 3 a.m., exhaustion pulled at him. His eyelids grew heavy. Knock, knock, knock. Daniel's eyes shot open. The sound was soft but deliberate, coming from the back door. His blood ran cold. He moved silently to the kitchen, every step shaking. The back door was only a few feet away. The knocking came again. 3 slow raps that echoed in his chest. His trembling hand reached for the doorknob, then stopped. He remembered the camera. Grabbing his phone, he opened the feed. The screen showed the backyard, empty, the fence, silent, no one at the door. Yet the knocking continued. Daniel barely slept again. By morning, he told himself he needed proof, something beyond grainy footage. That evening, he set up an old floodlight pointing directly at the fence. If anything came back, he'd see it. Hours dragged by, midnight, then 1, then 2. Just when his eyes started to close, creak, the gate. Daniel jumped up and rushed to the window. The floodlight burst on, casting harsh white over the yard. And there he was, the man, tall, twisted, clinging to the fence with long fingers curled over the top. His face was pale, stretched too thin, eyes like black pits. The floodlight washed every detail in sharp horror. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The man didn't move, didn't run. He just stared. Daniel called the sheriff the next day. They came, checked the property, walked the woods. They found nothing. No footprints, no signs of trespassing. Just an old fence and a nervous homeowner. But Daniel knew. That night, he stayed awake with every light blazing, clutching the bat, his eyes glued to the window. Midnight came, 1, 2, 3. Nothing. He started to breathe easier, almost convincing himself it was over. Then, slowly, faintly, the creak of the gate drifted in again. Daniel bolted upright, sweat dripping down his neck. He turned to the window, his pulse hammering. The floodlight clicked on. The man stood inside the fence, closer than ever before. His pale face inches from the glass, a twisted smile spreading across his lips. The lights flickered. The house groaned. And when everything went dark, Daniel screamed. By morning, the house was silent. The bat lay on the floor. The back door stood open, and at the fence, the wood bore fresh scratches, long, deep, carved by something with hands that were far too thin. Daniel was never seen again. It was a cold Friday evening when Ethan found himself alone at home. His parents had gone out for a late dinner, promising to return around midnight. The house was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that makes every creak in the floorboards sound louder than it should. Ethan sat on the living room couch with a blanket over his shoulders, scrolling mindlessly through his phone to distract himself. On the corner table sat something he almost never used, the old landline phone. It hadn't rung in months, maybe even years, ever since everyone in the family switched to their cell phones. Still, the device stayed plugged in, collecting dust, as if waiting for a reason to come alive again. That night it did. The sharp, mechanical ring of the phone cut through the silence, making Ethan nearly drop his mobile. He glanced at the landline in disbelief. For a second he thought he imagined it. Nobody ever called that number anymore. But the phone rang again. Ethan hesitated before answering. Slowly, he reached for the receiver and pressed it to his ear. "Hello?" he whispered. Nothing, just static. Faint crackling, like wind moving through broken wires. He listened harder, but there was no voice, no background noise, nothing human. His skin prickled with goosebumps. After a long pause, the line clicked and went dead. He hung up quickly and tried to shake it off. Maybe some wrong number, maybe interference. Still, the sound of that static lingered in his ears, like it had settled inside his head. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, Ethan picked it up faster. "Hello?" His voice was firmer now. For a long moment, there was only silence. He thought it was another dead call, until he heard it. A whisper. So faint, he almost convinced himself it wasn't there. Ethan, his name. A cold sweat formed at the back of his neck. "Who is this?" he demanded, his voice trembling despite his effort to stay calm. No answer. Only the faint sound of breathing, raspy and deliberate. Then the line went dead again. Ethan's stomach churned. His parents had only been gone an hour. Midnight was still far away, and now he was afraid to sit in that living room alone. From then on, the phone wouldn't stop. Every few minutes, it rang. Sometimes there was only static, sometimes silence, and sometimes the faint whisper of his name. Ethan tried ignoring it, but each ring was louder than the last, echoing through the empty house until it felt unbearable. Finally, in desperation, he unplugged the phone from the wall. But a moment later, as he walked back toward the couch, the phone rang again. It wasn't even plugged in. Terrified, Ethan picked it up one last time. This time there was no static, no silence. Instead, a deep, broken voice whispered, "Don't turn around." Ethan froze. His breath caught in his throat. Slowly, against every instinct, he began to glance over his shoulder. From the reflection in the darkened window across the room, he saw it. A tall, shadowy figure standing in the hallway, completely still watching him. The phone slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. Ethan bolted from the couch, his heart racing, and ran to the front door. But when he pulled it open, the porch light flickered, and the night outside was empty, eerily still. Behind him, the phone rang again. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. His trembling hands struggled with the doorknob, but something in him forced him to look back just once. The hallway was empty now, but the phone still rang. When his parents returned later that night, they found Ethan curled up on the porch, pale and shaking. The landline inside the house was still off the hook, and still ringing. Clara Jennings never minded living alone. Her little one-story house sat at the edge of town, quiet and tucked away from neighbors. Nights were still, filled with the sound of cicadas and the occasional train in the distance. But the screen door always made her uneasy. It was an old aluminum frame with a mesh center, the kind that squeaked every time you opened it. When the wind picked up, it rattled faintly, like someone tugging from outside. She told herself it was nothing. That was before the whispers began. The first time, Clara had just turned off the TV around midnight. She was rinsing her glass in the kitchen sink when she froze. A voice, low, hushed, slithering through the thin screen door. She held her breath and listened. The words were muffled, but clear enough to know they weren't the wind. Someone was outside her door. The next night, Clara stayed up later than usual. She wanted to prove to herself it was nothing, just her mind playing tricks. But at 1 a.m., the whispering returned. This time, she pressed herself against the wall near the door, straining to hear. "Open!" The word hissed through the mesh. Her blood went cold. "Please, open the door." The voice was low, rasping, like breath dragged over broken glass. Clara grabbed the phone with shaking hands. But when she glanced out the window, the porch was empty. The whispers, though, didn't stop. Clara couldn't take it anymore. The following evening, she called the sheriff. 2 deputies came by, checked the porch, tested the lock, and walked the yard with flashlights. They found nothing. No footprints, no signs of tampering. "Probably the wind," one said kindly. "Old screen doors creak and rattle at night." Clara wanted to believe them. She tried to laugh it off, thanked them, and watched their cruiser disappear down the street. But later that night, just as the clock ticked past midnight, the whispers returned. This time there were 2 voices. "Hey, let us in." "So cold. Let us in." Clara shoved her hands over her ears, tears burning her eyes. She didn't sleep until sunrise. By the 3rd week, Clara was unraveling. She barely slept, barely ate. Her days blurred, her nights dragged endlessly. And then the footsteps started. Slow, heavy, pacing across the porch. She sat rigid in the living room, the lamp dim beside her. The screen door rattled faintly as the unseen figures moved. Then knocks, gentle at first, then harder, shaking the thin frame. "Open!" The whisper now pressed directly against the mesh, as though the speaker's lips brushed the fabric. Clara screamed and ran to her bedroom, slamming the door, stuffing towels against the crack at the bottom. Still, the whispers slipped through. One night, the whispers stopped. No rattling screen door, no pacing footsteps, no voices in the dark. For the first time in weeks, Clara slept deeply. She woke up at noon the next day, dizzy but almost relieved. Maybe finally it was over. That evening, she made herself tea and curled up on the couch with a blanket. She even laughed at a show, something she hadn't done in weeks. But as the clock struck midnight, she noticed it. The screen door was open. Not wide, but just enough for the latch to dangle. And this time, there was no sound at all. Clara crept toward the kitchen, her breath short. She picked up the phone with trembling hands, but her fingers wouldn't dial. She could see the open door from where she stood. Her gut screamed to run, but her legs locked in place. Then, so close it felt like it came from just behind her ear. "We're already inside." Clara dropped the phone. Her scream was cut short. The neighbors found the house empty the next morning. The lights were on, the kettle was still warm, but the screen door hung wide open. Inside, on the kitchen floor, they found only one thing: the mesh from the screen, torn in the shape of 2 hands pressed against it. Claire's parents had gone out for the evening, leaving her alone in their quiet 2-story house. At 17, she wasn't easily spooked, but that night carried a strange weight in the air, the kind that pressed against your chest and made the silence feel unnatural. She sat at the dining table with her books spread out, pretending to study, though she kept glancing at the clock. The ticking seemed louder than usual, each second dragging on. Every so often she swore she heard a faint creak from upstairs, like someone shifting their weight on the old floorboards. She told herself it was just the house settling, but the noise kept coming, slow and deliberate. It felt less like a house creaking, and more like footsteps. Claire finally pushed her chair back, determined to prove to herself that nothing was wrong. She crept to the bottom of the staircase, listening hard. The sound stopped. She let out a shaky laugh. "It's nothing," she whispered. But just as she turned to head back, her eyes caught movement at the top of the stairs. Something was standing there. It wasn't clear, like a person. Instead, it was darker than the hallway itself. A tall, distorted shadow that didn't belong to anything she could see. Its outline flickered as if it were made of smoke. Claire froze. She blinked, and it was gone. Her heart pounded. She tried to convince herself it was her imagination. Maybe a trick of the light. Claire reached for the hallway switch and flicked it on. The bulb above her head sputtered, buzzing faintly before plunging the hallway back into shadow. The entire upstairs groaned, as if the weight of someone unseen had shifted again. She backed away from the stairs, refusing to look up. The urge to run outside fought with the stubborn thought that she had to be brave. Then faintly, she heard it. A whisper. Just one word. Claire. Summoning her courage, Claire climbed the stairs one step at a time, her hand clutching the wooden railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. When she reached the top, the hallway seemed different. It looked longer, much longer than it should have been. The familiar doors to her parents' room and her own bedroom felt impossibly far away, stretching into a tunnel of shadows. And in the middle of that darkness stood the figure. This time it didn't vanish. It stood waiting, tall and unmoving, its head tilted slightly as if it were studying her. Panic surged through her veins. Claire stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her own feet. She turned and bolted down the hallway, desperate to reach her bedroom door. But no matter how fast she ran, the door didn't seem to get any closer. The walls stretched and warped, the shadows closing in on her. Behind her, the sound of footsteps began, slow at first, then faster, pounding, chasing. Her breath tore from her chest as she screamed and lunged for the door handle. At last, her hand caught it. She yanked the door open and slammed it shut behind her, pressing her back against it as the footsteps stopped outside. Her bedroom was pitch dark except for the faint glow of the streetlight outside. Claire tried to catch her breath, her chest heaving. For a moment, there was silence. Then the doorknob rattled, once, twice, slowly, as though someone outside was testing it. She pressed her entire weight against the door. The rattling stopped. Relief washed over her for a split second, until she realized the shadow was no longer outside the door. It was inside the room. Claire spun around. The figure towered at the far corner of her room, its smoky form shifting like dark mist. It didn't move like a person. Instead, it seemed to drift closer, the edges of its body blurring as though it was part of the darkness itself. She screamed, fumbling for the lamp on her bedside table. When the light flicked on, the figure was gone. Her room was empty, but the hallway door slowly creaked open on its own. Claire didn't sleep that night. She sat curled up on her bed, the lamp glowing beside her, waiting for dawn. When her parents finally returned, they found her pale and shaken. The hallway light bulbs burned out, and the door upstairs still open wide. Claire never spoke about what she saw, but from that night on, she refused to sleep with her bedroom door closed, because she knew deep down the shadow still lingered in that hallway, waiting.